Now, your private equity spotlight on CEO Money.
Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba, your host. All right, we've got John Vandermosten, Senior Biotechnology Analyst at Zacks, Small Cap Research. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, John, this is kind of a freewheeling because you come in. I don't need to know what you're talking about. You just bring it, and then we jump in. So tell me, what are we talking about today?
Sure. So I thought it might be nice to share today a little bit about developing drugs in Europe. We know a lot about, well, some of us know a lot about the process here in the United States with the FDA and kind of the mess of pricing that we go through here with the PBMs. And there's some news today that we might talk about later.
Sure.
With Amazon, J.P. Morgan, and Berkshire Hathaway that might play into this. But today I thought we could talk about Europe a little bit and the process there.
Bring it.
So it's a little bit different than in the U.S. There are a few different ways where a drug can be approved, and this is after it goes through the trial process, the phase 1, 2, and 3 trial, and I've mentioned that before. But there's 4 different pathways that you can take to get a drug approved in Europe, and 2 of them are the most common. There's the centralized procedure and the decentralized procedure, and some drugs are required to go through the centralized procedure. And some can use the decentralized procedure. And basically what each one of these does is it allows you to get into the 28-member European Union going through one process. So it makes it faster. In the past, I think 25 or 30 years ago, whenever, before this was enacted, you had to go through each country individually. Very costly, very time-consuming. There are no economies of scale. So this new process makes it a lot easier for a company to bring a drug to the whole EU.
Wow. Okay. So very arduous, very difficult, very expensive. I get it. Now, you said there's 4.
There are 2 others that aren't used as much. There's a mutual recognition procedure, and that's where if a drug is recognized in one country, let's say Austria, you can kind of go take it around to the other 27 members and get it approved. And then there's the national procedure. For some drugs that maybe the whole EU does not want to approve, you can go to an individual country, let's say Belgium, and get it approved there. But that's very inefficient, and that kind of goes back to the way it used to be before. So generally, the centralized procedure is the best way to go because you get approval in all of the member states.
Expense, ballparking it. I know you can't get, everything's different. It's a real moving target, but it seems like obviously the centralized is the best way to go. But give us some breakdown on the steps of what a company has to experience or look forward to get to that point.
Sure. So the first thing a company has to do, or a sponsor, because sometimes the company that sponsors it is not the one that does all the trials, but is to go through the development process and get good data saying that the drug works, it's safe and effective. So after you finish that, then you're able to take it to the FDA in the United States and the EMA in the EU. So that's one part of it. And then there's about a year-long process where you interact with the agency. You present them data. They come back to you with questions. You submit the questions back to them, and then they give you a yes or no response. And that takes about a year.
Is the point of proving that the drug works to the point where you can actually go ahead and move forward and get it approved throughout the European Union, is that more difficult or less difficult than what you have to live through in the United States?
It depends on the drug, I think. Generally, if a drug has been approved in the U.S. first, it's a little bit easier over there because you've already gone through the process. Right. Not that it's easier by itself, but just because you've already you've kind of had the FDA's stamp of approval, and that makes the EMA feel a little bit better that they can approve it too.
Do they have tougher standards in Europe than they do in the United States to get drugs approved?
They're somewhat equivalent. I mean, there's differences here and there, and sometimes the label on a drug in the U.S. will be different from the label there. The indication it can be used for, and some of the warnings that it has, they may differ. But I think on the whole, it's very similar.
Well, the reason I bring this up is somebody was in here talking to me a week before last. They were saying, hey, you can't even get stem cell injections in the United States, but you can go to Panama and give them $25,000, and it's okay. And then in Europe, if I remember correctly, in Europe it's okay, but you can't do it here. So I'm thinking that there's some real lopsided rules on both ends of this.
Yeah, there are a number of drugs that have been approved in the U.S. that have not been approved in the EMA by the EMA, and vice versa. There have been drugs that have been approved there and not here.
What's the big difference on that? I mean, I would think if it's good. I mean, they're both big, massive
Right.
agencies. What I don't.
I think it's just the human element.
Oh, or
Yeah,
lobbyist?
I think
is it more
no.
money?
I don't think it's lobbyists. It's more just the individual way that the groups look at it. A lot of times there'll be a group of physicians convene to take a look at a drug on behalf of the EMA or the FDA, and they'll give their opinion on it. And these are all individuals with their own points of view and their own experiences. And one panel may say we really like it, and the other panel may see a lot of risks.
Okay. Oh, I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds on just some of the questions I have, but please bring up more important points.
But it is a little bit different. Well, that's only half the process of getting something approved in Europe. In the United States, you have the second half of this where you get the pricing. You have to go to the PBM, the pharmacy benefit managers here in the U.S. There's a bunch of them: CVS, Caremark, there's Optum from United Health. And several others, and you work with them to come up with a price in the United States, and there's a lot of negotiating, and we don't really see that as consumers because it's all done by companies, by public companies, but in private. And in the EU, it's a little bit different, and it's negotiated on a country by country basis. It's not negotiated for the whole EU states. It's done individually. It's not done privately, but it's done by the government on behalf of the citizens in the state. And they have several ways they look at it. If you look at pricing in the U.S. versus the EU, it's about 40 to 55% of the U.S. price here on average. There's been some studies done looking.
Why?
Because there's one entity negotiating on behalf of everybody. In the United States, there are many, many parties negotiating on behalf of the ultimate consumer. But in the EU, they're very price conscious because it's the government, right? The government's paying for it. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot more negotiating power because, in Germany, I'm trying to remember the population, 80 million people. So one entity is negotiating on behalf of 80 million people. So it gives them a much stronger negotiating platform. And that's probably the main reason why. But another reason is the way they do it. It's a little bit it's very structured. Okay, so they try to look at a drug and how much value it adds. They try to quantify the value that a drug adds. And there's a few ways to do that. There's one thing called an ICER score. There's also another one called the quality of life years. So basically it looks at the quality of life with this drug compared to without it and tries to come up with a value for that.
That's an interesting scale.
It is. And in some drugs, like for cancer drugs where it actually extends your life, it's a little bit easier. But for other drugs where, maybe
aspirin.
Yeah, sure. Where it just makes you feel a little bit better or it takes away some pain. It's a little bit more difficult to determine that.
Wow. Okay. And you did a write-up?
I did. Yeah. So yes, all of this work was done on behalf of an initiation we put out yesterday on Cardiome. And I should remind our listeners that the companies that we run on do sponsor our work. But we put that out yesterday, and it talks about their efforts in Europe.
Where'd you put it up?
It's on our website at scr.zacks.com. And I invite listeners to take a look at it because it goes into what I've talked about right here and also talks about the company's strategy in Europe. They're one of the few companies out there that actually are focused just on Europe. If a drug developer in the United States wants to develop in the U.S. and outsource it to somebody else in Europe, these are the guys they may want to go to.
All right, we got to take a break now, but we'll talk more on the other side of the break. What tease us for the next segment? What are we talking about next?
Sure. Well, we can talk about a little bit more about how the pricing is done.
Okay, sounds good. We'll be right back on the other side of this break with John Vandermosten, Senior Biotech Analyst, Zacks Small Cap Research, scr.zacks.com. Segment is brought to you by Zacks. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba, John Vandermosten, Senior Biotechnology Analyst, Zacks Small Cap Research with me. All right, John, lead us off where we're going on this segment.
Sure. I was thinking we could talk about pricing a little bit more. Some statistics for our listeners, first of all. So the pharmaceutical market is about $1 trillion in size, maybe a little bit bigger for the whole globe. The United States makes up, depending on the statistics you look at, maybe just a little bit below to a little bit above half. So 330 million people make up over half of the global pharmaceutical market. So obviously the U.S. is a very important market. The EU, that's the second largest market, and that's about a quarter of the total. I've seen stats from about 180 to 200 billion, maybe a little bit less than a quarter. So that's obviously the second most important market. And then moving down a little bit further, Japan is number 3, and then everybody else is kind of the rest at number 4. Australia, I think, might be the number 4 largest market. We also think of India and China with their huge populations as being other areas that are important. But just because of, I think, partly due to intellectual property protections, and then secondly, just due to the per capita income in those areas, they just have not emerged yet as being dominant markets.
So a mature economy ends up being a higher ranking.
Sure, certainly, yeah.
Not that India isn't mature, not that China isn't mature, but it's just the general populace's relative income stream, medium,
and the ability to afford the care, and also the value of the care. I mean, the cost of care is a lot lower in those areas as well. So when I talk about the U.S. being, half of the entire pharma market, part of that is because there are higher prices here.
We can afford.
We're just paying more, right? We're paying more for an individual drug than they would in India or China. So that's part of it too.
That lets out the lopsidedness of our overall global culture. Okay, what about the hot news that just hit the street today?
Sure. So this is the big deal about J.P. Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, and Amazon. We all knew Amazon was going to do something in healthcare, but we didn't expect this. From what I've seen so far, it looks like they're going to join together to create some kind of healthcare entity that will lower prices. And I think some of the commentary I saw, it might have been related to transparency in pricing, because we don't know a lot of times what we're paying for things. We see list prices for healthcare services and pharmaceuticals, but a lot of times those are not the ultimate prices paid. And sometimes the ultimate prices paid are much, much different from the list prices. So they might be trying to fight this.
Yeah, I want to hear your impression of where it's going to go. I mean, have we opened up a new door, or are they going to help people better, or are they just, hey, we figured out how to get our paycheck out of this too? I mean, come on. There's all kinds of ways to look at this one.
Certainly, and I think they admitted themselves they don't quite know exactly which direction it's going to go. But I think that the never-ending increase in healthcare costs, which have exceeded inflation for 40, 50 years, maybe more than that, right. At some point it's going to force somebody to do something. So this is an attempt to do something about that. And if they're successful, I mean, these companies have succeeded in very difficult areas, so there's no reason why they won't succeed here as well.
Well, what do you think the path to success with these groups would be on this?
Well, there's a number of ways. I mean, I think if there's more transparency, I mean, look at what Amazon has done, in every other consumer market.
Right.
They've made it easy to determine value with consumer ratings and then also find price. I mean, instantly on the internet, you can find several providers of a similar product and compare the price, and then you can also find out how people value it by reading the recommendations. So something similar to that could apply to healthcare as well.
I agree. Okay. Anything else you want to bring to the table?
Let's see.
And Ed, was there anything awfully quiet we wanted over there?
Ed was gonna mention something about the big news today. Well, I guess I could expand a little bit more and just say who this might impact the most. I think if you took a look at the performance today by sector, you'd have seen the healthcare insurers got pretty hard. Yes. Probably the PBMs did as well, because that's probably where most of what Amazon has done could go forward.
Right.
The hospitals may see lower reimbursements as well.
I'm just looking at Amazon stock based on this news. They're not the only ones out there, but it took a pretty good pop, $14.33.
Yeah.
So up $1.04 on the release. I mean,
that's impressive. Everybody else is down. I mean, I think the markets were pretty off on that. Especially healthcare.
Yeah.
So we see which way the value is being perceived to go.
Okay, well, what's next for you and Zacks? What's coming up? I mean, you're going to bring some guests on the show to introduce some of the people that you found of interest and
Sure.
dug into. their company. Give me some idea where we're going with this.
Well, we're going to try to find some executives from some of the companies that we cover to come here on the show and chat a little bit about what they're working on.
You know, I found that sometimes the audience helps us out with that, and maybe if there's a way the audience can somehow get their suggestions to you. I know that you pick out your own lane, but if you're open to it, we should open that up to the audience and let them give you more options or more choices. How do you feel about that?
Certainly. Yeah, if there's ideas of great companies that are out there that we don't know about. I mean, the one thing about the biotechnology space is there are numerous companies with a lot of them with really great ideas. I mean, pretty much every company I've spoken to, we don't cover all of them, but I mean, there are really great ideas in so many different areas, and we can't obviously cover them all, but some ideas are better than others. And if the listeners have a good idea of a company that would fit into that, we'd
go to scrzacks.com.
I'll have to check on that where we could go. I do believe we have an email there where we can, and I have my own email. It's on our website. It's jvandermosten@zacks.com, and it's also on our website, so you can find it there instead of trying to write it down while you're driving.
Perfect. John, thanks for being here.
All right. You're welcome.
All right. John Vandermosten, Senior Biotechnology Analyst at Zacks.